Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum. Steve and I are joined tonight by a very special guest to talk about a movie coming up. That's actually, by the time this video goes out, this movie will actually come out literally tomorrow. So we're joined with Jamie Nash, who is the director of an upcoming horror film called Last Night at Terrace Lanes. It's maybe we'll link the trailer. I was going to play it, but I didn't upload it. So I guess we'll put a link to that. Steve and I saw this trailer. We talked about it in the last Coffee Crypt. It was like we were so hyped watching this trailer. We were so excited about it. It looked really unique, really cool. And so we're really excited to be talking about it. If Jamie's name sounds familiar, it's because he's done everything you can do as a human being. He's written books, put out things like kids' books, comic books, novels on how to write screenplays or do things for television. He's been in the horror world a lot as well. I know him from the very first thing I knew him from was he was part of the writing project for the movie Exist, which if you have ever talked to me about found footage, you know is my absolute favorite found footage film that is Bigfoot related. It outbeats the other one everyone talks about by a long shot. He's also done films like Lovely Molly, which was ironically a film I had seen but did not know you were part of. So that was cool to learn. As well as one of Steve and actually both of us, I think, one of our favorite segments from VHS2, which was Ride in the Park, which is a really, really cool point of view, like zombie storyline that just doesn't leave you after you watch it. And another film called Altered. But yeah, primarily we're here to talk to him about this experience on Last Night at Terrace Lanes. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I mean, all independent film is kind of grassroots. It's people like you. So I love, visiting. I'm so happy you invited me on. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So for people that don't know, what can you tell us about Last Night at Terrace Lanes?
Yeah, Last Night at Terrace Lanes. It's a Epic Pictures Dread Central production. I guess Dread is their label.
Mm-hmm.
And it's essentially about a girl who goes on a date to a bowling alley, and it's the final night of this bowling alley's existence. It's going to go out of existence because bowling is a dying thing, and it's kind of this date from hell. And then it gets a lot more hellish because this evil cult kind of targets the bowling alley as the place on that night to perform kind of their final ritual. So it's kind of a siege movie in some ways.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like Kingpin meets Assault on Precinct 13 or something like that. I don't know what.
Yeah.
It kind of turns into a bit of a horror Die Hard in some ways.
That's exciting.
Yeah, with the two leads. So that's the general pitch.
I mean, that last line is going to sell my husband on this movie. So one of his favorites.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, and Steve and I are both we like are big fans of certain slasher films, and so coming into something like this that is more like people driven, at least in like as far as what we know, because obviously we haven't seen the film, like it's really surprising, especially the location. Choosing to do something like this in a bowling alley. What were some pros and cons of working in a bowling alley between sound and light and had to be a journey, right?
Really good questions. This is a low budget horror film, and the pros were it essentially was one location. It was the studio. We were able to set up offices there. I think people might have slept there. We were able to,
nice.
It's a big place. So whenever you get anything like that in an independent film, and you can just camp out there and live there, it's awesome, right? So that was definitely the biggest pro. I think sound wise, it was actually, when you mention these things, sound wise was fine. Lighting wise was kind of fine too, because there's in some ways you're limited because you have to flip all the lights on. You know what I mean? So you can't really do too much stylistically when the lights are on. But then when we turn the lights off, we go to rockable mode basically at some
Yeah.
point. And like half the film is rockable mode, and then it gets a little more stylish, and you can start playing around with the lights and your own lights.
Oh,
But
okay.
but when everything was actually fully on, it was funny. I mean, there's fill lights and reflectors and things like that you use, but it
Yeah.
actually saved us a lot of trouble. Like when we were in some ways, the bowling alley saved us a lot of trouble with the lighting.
Oh.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. And the only other thing I'd say, pros wise, is I don't know that this is a pro or not. It was to us. We used every inch of the place. I mean, every single inch of the place, which was really
Yeah.
cool. And they let us.
That would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, like sort of like one big, like you said, like a big sleepover in a bowling alley, right? Like it's sort of like like
And it was fully functioning too.
yeah.
So, like the night before, like when we first met, we did our table read and then we bowled and had a party.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. And our wrap party, we bowled. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
lot of bowling. You kind of got sick of bowling by the end of it. You're like, yeah.
Wait, so this alley, so did they shut down like business for the film? Like, and how long was filming?
Yeah, yeah. So that's that's kind of the narrative of the production right there. Is so what happened was the basically before I even got involved, the producer of the main producer is a guy named Carlo Glorioso. He and I actually first worked on the first time we worked together was VHS 2. So he's somebody that goes way back with me. I've
Mhm.
worked with him in the past. He lives in this town, Frederick, Maryland, and there was a beloved bowling alley that was going out of business, Terrace Lanes. It's really called Terrace Lanes, and it
Ah,
actually was going out of business. So this last night at Terrace Lanes thing was kind of, that part is kind of true. There's a lot of truth into the movie. So a week before they contacted me, um, it had its last night at Terrace Lanes kind of party was that week before was this kind of sad
oh,
night where the
Wow.
town kind of said goodbye to this bowling alley. And then he was able to wrangle basically 4 weeks out of them before they tore it down. Um, so when he contacted me, they had a one-page treatment they had pitched to Dread. They had a bowling alley, and they had about 8 weeks to. So he contacted me in like June, and it was going to
mhm.
be gutted in August. So we had to have a script, uh, pre-production, and everything shot probably within about 7 weeks.
That's
Wow.
We had to
crazy.
do all that. So it was this really crunch schedule.
But it sounds like it was a solid sort of team that you had, and while that's a
Yeah.
huge challenge, it sounds like kind of together you were able to
Yeah,
make it happen.
for sure. And it's a lot of people I worked with before, and
Mhm.
people that I've worked with in high stress, low budget horror environments that are used to the crunch. They weren't scared of the crunch. They were like, oh,
Right.
okay, this is what it is, and let's go get it. Let's get after it. Um, for me, I'm mainly a screenwriter, so
Mhm.
when I get a chance to direct, I always say if I get a chance to direct and I don't have to invest to do it, I'm going to do it because
Yeah.
it's such a privilege to be offered to direct anything. And I've directed a few things in the past, but when they came at me, even though it was a possible mission, I was like, no, let's do it. Um, we had a writer. So the writer was Adam Caesar,
Mhm.
and Adam Caesar he wrote a book called Clown in a Cornfield is his
Yep.
best-selling YA book, and he and I had co-written a lot of stuff together in the past. Um,
Oh, okay.
and I had worked with Carlo, who's the producer, and Ed Sanchez was on as executive producer as well. He's part of that team.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, it was a lot of people I knew. It was very much a local production. We brought a couple people in from like LA and stuff as actors,
Yeah.
but other than that, it was a really homegrown, a group of people, most of which I had worked with, or Carlo had worked with, or one of us had worked with. So yeah, it was a great team effort to pull it all off.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, like, if you're, having to say goodbye to a business in a town, and then like that's such a great way to go out, though, is like to be a part of a project like that. At least it would be for me as a horror fan. I would be like, yeah, use my building. I don't care. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, we could do anything we wanted. I remember the big deal was we couldn't get blood on the lanes because um, uh, they were selling the lanes to another facility or something. So
Huh.
they were going to take the lanes and then ship them out. And actually, I went to do pickups there like a month later, and all the lanes were gone. It just,
Weird.
so it was weird. It was a bowling alley. It was just like where the lanes were. It was just kind of raw, unfinished concrete or something like that.
Strange.
I mean,
Yeah,
no one
that
wants to
was
buy bloody lanes. I mean, I feel like there's a market for that.
Nobody did. We got the lanes kind of bloody. We just cleaned them up. At first it was like, don't get blood on the lanes. We got them bloody. We just were like, we can clean them up.
be
It'll
really
go on.
careful, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they've got that stuff on them, right? That like slick stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did that make it harder to clean them off or make it easier?
So yeah, I learned all about the inner workings of a bowling alley. They have this machine that goes over each lane to wax them.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's like this big old, I don't know, piece of construction equipment almost, but it just waxes each lane and puts a layer. But it actually does the reverse too. It can clean the layer of wax off. So when we were filming, we had them clean it off. But if we ever bowled, we had to put the wax back on. So like if we were having a fight scene or something like that, we'd obviously take it off. But then if we were going to have a bowling scene, we might wax one or two of the lanes just to bowl on.
Yeah, that was something Steve talked about, I think, in our Coffee Crypt episode, was he was like, it must have been so hard to film scenes like that on those lanes because they're slick. But that makes sense, though.
Yeah, no, you would totally fall and stuff. Yeah, it would be really dangerous to do it when they're slick, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I mean, I've definitely slipped as a kid on some bowling alley.
It as an adult. Are you kidding?
I think I worked at like a summer camp, and we took some kids bowling, and I remember chasing a kid down one of those lanes and just falling like crazy because the kid ran down the lane. Yeah, they're really bad.
Yeah.
That experience make it into the movie?
Yeah, kind of in ways it did. Yeah, for sure. It's the inspiration for the whole thing.
No, the lanes, I mean, just from the trailer and like, and you kind of see it in the poster in our background, but I mean, when you go look at the poster, like it's such an aesthetically like just cool image of like the long lanes going back. Like I just remember being floored in the trailer, and I mentioned this to Angel as soon as I saw it, was like when they were all sort of crawling out of the gutters.
Oh my God.
It's just visually like that was
Stunning.
so cool.
Yeah, that was something we put in the script, and I remember when we put it in, we were like, is it even possible? We weren't really sure how bowling alleys worked. You know what I mean? Like we were like, does it even make sense? But then when we got there, we were like, oh, it kind of makes sense. Behind, and I learned all this on set, obviously, because I lived in there so much. But behind, there's a pin setter machine, and there's these huge mechanisms. They're actually, when I say they're huge, they're kind of small. They're low to the ground, but they're just like, just these mechanical things, engines back there that kind of, but you can actually get inside one. There's like a little kind of trap door, and you can kind of sneak in. And I'm not sure if it's entirely safe, but if you turn everything off, it's okay.
I guess you got to go back there for maintenance if you're working.
They do. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think some of the like, just that's again like talking about being excited about the trailer, the way that this is shot, genuinely, like there's so many. That was a really good one. But even when we get that kind of low to the ground shot in the trailer of when one of the characters, I don't know who they are yet, but one of the characters is in the stall, and then there's one of the cult guys coming in, and it's just this like, it's just amazing what the way like something is made to be shot and how that affects what you are thinking and feeling when you're watching. And all of those components in the trailer, like, had me so excited to see this. Cause I think like we've gotten a lot of new trailers recently, especially in the last, like, first of the year, but this one I think was the first one that I was like, this looks so different and so unique. Are there any themes of, as far as in the film that you are able to talk about that aren't too spoilery? Other than, I know you mentioned it's like a siege film, but I mean, just as far as any other themes.
I'm trying, there's a father-daughter thing at the heart of it. That's really where the thing comes in. The main character, the date from hell is because she used to hang out at the bowling alley all the time. Her dad worked at the bowling alley. He's kind of the maintenance guy.
Oh, okay.
And so when she goes back there, she's kind of embarrassed, and the friends are kind of doing it as a lark, like it's kind of this goofy, this place is going out of business. And she's like, oh no, dad's going to be there, you know, and he's kind of estranged. It's an estranged father. So
Oh,
it's one of these things where the two of them kind of team up. They're kind of the diehard team. I know he's not in the poster, but he's a good friend of mine, Ken Arnold. You
oh, cool.
ever saw the Night Watchman? He was a star of the Night
Yeah.
Watchman.
Oh,
Um, I'm trying to think. He also produced a Comedy of Horrors, which was another thing I directed a
Yep.
segment in. And he's been in Lovely Molly. He's been in like Satanic Hispanics. Did you see Satanic Hispanics yet? Have you seen that movie yet?
No,
That's
not yet. I haven't seen it yet.
that's a Dread
Yeah.
movie that just came out not too long ago.
Yeah, it's on
And
my list.
he features heavily. He plays a cop in that. But
Okay.
he's a really good comedic actor. And he's a good friend of mine. So he was
Oh,
somebody
cool.
I had a shorthand with. But yeah, so there's kind of that father-daughter story. At the same time, the cult is kind of, and these aren't really spoilers. You learn this stuff in the first couple minutes. But
Sure.
the cult is kind of they're almost kind of Hale Bop in some ways. They're like this weird mix of Hale Bop and influencers.
Oh,
And
okay.
they're kind of in a very horror comedy sort of way. While they're very dangerous, they're also like kind of like how Ghostface is. These are not trained killers, so they make
Sure.
a lot of mistakes and they
Sure.
take a lot of damage along the way.
I love
These
that.
killers,
Yeah.
yeah.
and I love that you call them like influencers. Like, I guess, is there some social commentary going on in this film?
There is a little bit, and that's Adam, the writer. I mean, that is kind of his thing. Like he's really good at having the pulse of kind of that modern commentary in his work, and so there is definitely a hint of that. It's not too heavy handed or too huge, but
Sure.
there's a touch of it.
Right. But the flavor is there.
Absolutely. Mhm.
What was it like shifting from like the like the writer's chair to the directing chair?
Yeah. It's so I've done a bit of it. I mean, not a ton. It's like every couple years I get to direct something. You know,
Yeah.
I did a Comedy of Horrors anthology before this. I've done like a web series. This year I'm doing an audio drama. So I always get a little
Oh,
taste of directing. And it's kind of
Yeah.
why I wanted to be in film to begin with. Originally I wanted to be a director, but
Mhm.
then I realized kind of the all-encompassing nature of directing wasn't as much for me as writing like 3 or 4 scripts a year. I like working on lots of projects, and
Yeah.
directors really do have to kind of, oh, I'm just working on this one thing for several months at a time, or a
That
year
makes
at a time,
sense.
or even a couple years, you know.
right.
But I'm somebody that really likes to work on like 3 or 4 things a year. You know, I just like to mix
Yeah.
it up. So the shifting of it, what I always say is I really come at it like a writer. I approach it in a kind of storytelling mode. Um, it's like writing, but unlike writing, where you get to keep going back and revisiting and take your time
Yeah.
in directing, especially something low budget as this, because the time frame is condensed. It's
Yeah.
like you have a deadline every 10 minutes. You know, if you
Yeah.
that's all you get to think. Whereas in writing, the deadlines are kind of as long as you need them to be, or they can be. You can always revisit something. You can always take time and ponder. Whereas
Yeah.
directing, it's like you're making the decisions on the fly, and that's usually the only chance you get. It's like, okay, I made that decision. I'm just gonna have to go with it. That's the decision I make. Writing, I do that too on a daily basis, but then the next day I get to go back and change it.
Sure.
And that's the finality of it, I guess, is the thing. Your decisions are kind of final until you get to post, and then you get to play and edit and change things around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a little more, fix it in post, in edit, and writing, but in
Yeah.
the directing, it's just sort of what you shoot is what you have,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
Yeah.
post is a time when directing can be a lot of fun too, because at first it's kind of devastating because you're like, oh, all the things we didn't get, or all the things.
Yeah.
But then as you get in there and you start coming up with creative solutions to little problems, it gets better and better every
Huh.
day, bit by bit. So it's a lot of fun.
It sounds like being in the writer's chair really can help, like, get you into the direct, like, just that creative sense. Like, I was gonna say that with the storytelling and, like, just the way that it kinda seems like the 2 go really well together, as far as if you were gonna do the writing and then you get to direct, then I can see that being like a skill set that kind of transfers over and helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And you meet some directors that they're all about visuals. And
Mhm.
so I was joking with somebody joked back to me the other day. There were some directors they've been on set with, they weren't even sure if they read the script. They were just so interested in their visuals and the storyboards and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
um I storyboard stuff for myself just to kind of
Mhm.
um give me, so it's not all new. When I set foot, I did some
Sure.
deep thinking about what I was going to do that day, because it's going to go so fast. But the other thing
Mhm.
I tend to do, and this is definitely a writer kind of thing,
Mhm.
I'll keep rewriting scripts and stuff like that. I'll keep going through them over and over and over, right to the last minute. I'll be like, let's do another pass. Let's change this dialogue. Let's do this. And I'll take every second I have uh, to get it before the camera says action. I'll just
Yeah.
keep working it, working it, working it. In some ways, that's just good for me because it gets in my blood. Um,
Yeah.
I know it, so that when somebody comes and asks me a question about a costume or a prop or something like
Mhm.
that, I have all this kind of data in my head because I've been living it, so closely. Yeah.
It's like the
Yeah.
ultimate world building exercise.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's what I do. It's almost like a good way to calm the nerves or the stress of it. I'm just like, okay, I have these 10 pages to shoot today. I'm going
Mhm.
to just start from the beginning. Let's read it. Let's go through it. Let's scratch things out. Let's add things. Let's come up with little ideas. And then the next day, I'm ready to go because I did all that work.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of surprising things come out too, whether like, an actor has an idea on set or something, and probably surprise yourself, from day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and my favorite part is the actors, because I like them surprising me. Like, that's fun because
Mhm.
after all this time you spend with the script, as a director, you spend working with a writer, and
Yeah.
then an actor comes and gives new life, or they add a little something, and they're the fun moments. They're
Yeah.
that's the time when I can kind of take a break and let them do the work and
Yeah.
enjoy it, and sit in judgment of them for a little bit. Uh, so that part's always great. But then there are surprises during the day. The most difficult thing is to kind of be open, especially on. So this schedule, we shot this thing in like basically 12 days. It was a 12-day shoot,
Wow.
and
Gee.
most films shoot it's a short one. This one's like, and it was by design. It was short when we went into it. It's like 75 minutes tight. It's just like
Oh, okay.
right there, and
Yeah.
it's really fast paced. Um,
Mhm.
but it was 12 days, and most films, like every other film, like when you talk about Exists or something like that, Exists
Mhm.
might have been a 22-day shoot. Lovely Molly, which is a very low budget movie, 22-day shoot. This was 12, and 2 of the days were like part-time days because we were splitting the crew with Satanic Hispanics. Um, so yeah, it was intense. Like, it was like, okay, we got to shoot 7 or 8 pages a day. And you've seen the trailer. The
Mhm.
one problem I have when I design things like this, and this is between me and the writer, is I like to kind of go for it. So this has extras. This has this has stunts. This has action scenes, battles. It has a
Yeah.
full burn in it, and it was all done in 10 days, or 12 days. 10 and 2 halves, I'd say. Um, so I love I as a kid, I was a big fan of, like, I'm a big Evil Dead fan,
Yeah.
and thinking of what Raimi did on the first Evil Dead, especially
Yeah.
on that budget, and just how now the advantage he had was time, because
Sure.
they'd go back and do pickups and reshoots and do all this other stuff and
Yeah.
do stop motion in the basement and all this kind of stuff. Um, but the thing that always impressed me with Sam Raimi, with Peter Jackson, some of my favorite horror comedy guys, is
Mhm.
they made movies they had no business making on the budgets they made them on. They crammed so many creative ideas and stunts and and,
Yeah.
uh, and gags and all this stuff, and they always push the envelope on what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Almost to the point where you can see the seams sometimes, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of, this movie's a little like that. I think this movie has
Yeah.
uh, stuff you should be doing at a much bigger budget that we're doing at this budget. And for the most part, I think we pulled it off.
No. I was gonna, it's funny. I was gonna ask you sort of what are some of your biggest horror influences. So it sounds like Raimi, Jackson. Are there some others too?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of all over the board in some ways because Raimi and Jackson are the two I kind of go back to. I did like the horror comedy. I like kind of the action and stuff like that. I started with horror at such an early age that I wasn't scared of it pretty quickly. Like I was terrified of it at first, but
Yeah.
like I was like 6 or 7 years old when I saw the first Halloween, Halloween 2,
Yeah.
Jaws. I mean, I was really young, like way too young.
Yeah.
The Exorcist, all those movies. So I had a big background. By the time I was like 12 years old, I had seen all the horror classics that
All
we
the
kind of
classics.
talk about today. So that's why I think I gravitate towards like them when Raimi and Jackson came, and they're spoofing it a little bit. I think Reanimator was another big one for
Oh,
me
I
as
love
a
that
kid.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some of my bigger influences. I do like the ones with a little bit of comedy, but I'm also a big John Carpenter fan too. So
Okay.
yeah, I like them all. There's not too many like 80s horror. Like I'm a big 80s horror guy basically.
Sure.
And there's
What's
not
not to love?
there's not too much in the 80s I don't like, or everything has Fright Night was a huge one for me.
No, it's a great one.
The Lost Boys was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
There's just so many I could just list. And then I like other genres too, but I like ones that dabble in horror a little. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's got horror touches. I mean, that's a movie
Yeah,
with lots of horror touches.
Definitely does.
Yeah. RoboCop is one, and while it's not a horror, it has this weird wild vibe to it, that I always loved and things like that. So these are some of my bigger influences. They'll have a lot of violence, a little bit of tongue-in-cheek comedy, and they're kind of fun, even though maybe they have a little bit of bad taste in the best way, and they're a little over the top and extreme. I think that's where my tastes lie.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was Raiders or Temple of Doom, but one of the Jones films, I think in combination with like Gremlins and Poltergeist, is the reason why they came up with like a PG-13 rating.
Yeah, Temple of Doom. It was Temple of Doom.
It was Temple, right?
Temple of Doom. Yep. And the horror movie that got the PG-13 was Gremlins. The first Gremlins.
It did get PG-13. Okay.
Yeah, that was when the MPAA or whatever it was. Yeah, that's when they realized we should really come up with something in between the two. Because Jaws and Poltergeist are PG.
Yeah, except when I was a kid, and I can't remember what year. Maybe I was older than 13, but they let everybody into every movie. Like they didn't turn me away from R-rated movies. As I was 12 years old, like walking into an R-rated movie, and they didn't care back then.
Yeah, it was like, you can pay for your ticket. Come on
They
in.
didn't care about that until
I remember the first time I saw people caring about that for whatever reason was, and it's the weirdest movie. It was Scary Movie, the spoof of Scream.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I remember they were really picky about the ages with that. And I was like, oh, this is weird. That's totally different than when I was a kid. And they were like checking everybody and making sure you had a parent with you. And I was like, times have changed.
Well, that's like Satanic Panic, right? When they were all like D&D and all of this stuff,
Everything
and horror really
devil.
got like scapegoated along with like a lot of the geek sort of sci-fi fantasy stuff.
Yeah, I was a Dungeons and Dragons kid. I watched horror movies. My mother was always like, "There's some weird books in your room," because I had like Stephen King and Clive Barker and all stuff. She didn't look too hard. She'd just come in and say, "There's some really odd books in your room. I don't know what this is about." And I'd be like, "Yeah, whatever." I was always the house. Like, it's funny because my mother was my parents were pretty conservative in general, but they kind of turned their eye toward like what I was doing. You know what I mean? They didn't pay much attention to it. So while my parents seemed like the stricter parents on the block, my other friends were like, "You can't play D&D, you'll turn into," so they'd come over to my house and play, and we'd all be on the back porch playing. My mother wouldn't really care. She'd just be like, "That's some weird stuff they're doing back there. I don't know what it is. I don't understand it." They just kind of
Were you an only child?
No, I had two sisters, but they were totally different. They had zero interest in any of this stuff. So
Sure. I wish I was into D&D like as a kid. I only started getting into it like
As
just
an
after
adult.
college, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
man, this would have been so like
Me too.
good for the creativity.
Yeah, I grew up in the age when it really came about. So it was
Yeah.
like, you know, like we were first adopters of it. It was almost whispered amongst the group, and like one kid knew how to play and he taught the others. And it was like, what is this weird thing that there was nothing like it because there was no role-playing computer games or anything like that.
Nothing.
So it was just this weird, unusual thing. And it kind of swept in my little circle and took it by storm. And it wasn't like just the nerd kids or whatever. It was whoever, everybody kind of wanted to try it because it was like this weird, unusual thing. And it just, some of us like me, or, we were the ones that kind of got swept a little bit more, or we lasted a little longer with it, where other people just dabbled and then got away.
Right.
But yeah, and it was a big storytelling influence for me. I always wanted to be the dungeon master. I didn't want to be a player. And it was really just because I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to come up with narratives. Yeah.
So have you run horror campaigns in your day then?
I almost completely gave it up. Not that I sort of still love the trappings of it, and I love to hear people. I still consider myself a D&Der, but I don't know, sitting down and doing it hasn't entered the equation in a long time. I think I did I know I did a podcast once where they invited me on to play.
Oh yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. But that's about as close as I've gotten to it in recent years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're so busy making kick-ass movies, so
it's honestly, the writing thing scratched a lot of itches. There were all these things through childhood that I think I was trying to find what this was, like trying to get this feeling. But then when I found writing and I really was able to do it and complete and stuff like that, I think I found the answer to those questions, that I was trying to fill all these different ways. Yeah.
Maybe one day you could work, or you could write a campaign for Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
I
would love to do that. That'd be awesome. It's funny that you said it, because I was talking to somebody the other day, and I've done so many different writing projects. I've done comic books and novels. I've done stuff for theme parks. I did Hallis Scream, for Busch Gardens a few years back.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I've done all this stuff, and I've done computer games. And somebody asked me, because they knew I was kind of this D&D background. They were like, "Well, have you ever done a role-playing game?" And I'm like, damn, you just hit something that I now have to put on my list. Like I've been scratching this list off, and I almost gotten to the end of all the things I've kind of done. And now I had to put one more thing back on there. Like, you got me. I never even thought of it. It never occurred to me. So you're the second person that's kind of said that in the last kind of 2 weeks or something.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
It's a sign.
Not good. Not good.
Well, it's on so many people's mind. I mean, D&D is really high. I mean, they just had the big movie. I don't know how well it did in box office, but they just had a movie recently.
That was funny.
Yeah. You mentioned doing like stuff in the children's genre. What has sort of that dichotomy sort of between like doing horror, doing stuff for kids? How is that sort of challenged or like inspired you as a writer, director, creator?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and it's funny because I guess in my first 10 years of being a screenwriter, mostly was almost all horror exclusively. There was one kids movie I wrote, but that was it. There was one that got produced, and I wrote it, and that was it. And everything else was pretty much the horror genre. And then the next 10 years, pretty much I made my living. I paid my bills through the kids stuff, the kids movies. And the two sides really do not mix at all. Like in some genres, I'm sure things mix, like horror and action or something like that.
Sure.
But the people I talked to at Nickelodeon, when I told them like what my movies, they'd be like, "Oh, you got a movie coming out." And I tell them, and they'd be like, "Yeah, I don't watch horror." They'd be those. They were those people. They're like, "No, I can't do horror." And it was amazing how many people in the kids, because you think one person would be like, I work in the kids genre, but I love horror. I
You know,
just think that would happen.
it's surprising,
Yeah.
because when Angel and I were coming up, right? Like Nickelodeon had like Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Absolutely.
We had
Yeah.
Goosebumps. I
Yeah.
mean, there
Some
was
of the best stuff. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
And it may just be the people I ran into or what they were working
Sure.
on. A lot of them were working on kind of the sitcoms at Nickelodeon and Disney and stuff like that. So maybe
It's
that
completely
was
different energy. Yeah.
different
Sure.
vibe. But yeah, the two, and then the horror people, obviously, they had no idea what was going on in the kids space or anything like that. That's a whole totally different space. I tell you what, the reason I think both worked for me, it's the horror comedy aspect. So when I was coming up, for the most part, I was writing stuff to make myself. So I was thinking like, oh, what can I do like Peter Jackson or Sam Raimi and stuff? And I started to go down these crazy horror comedy paths. And what I quickly determined when I became a professional screenwriter, as somebody who just wanted to make stuff with his friends,
Yeah.
is people weren't interested in horror comedy at all in the studio level. It's like, it's very, very hard to get a horror comedy through. They want scary. They're like, no, we want very serious and scary. It was very
Yeah.
hard to get things through. So my pivot, because it was in my DNA to write those kind of stories, was like, well, kids do horror comedy, and a lot of the kind of movies like that I love as a kid. So I like or I should say a lot of the movies that I wanted to write that seemed natural in my DNA were things like Ghostbusters
Yeah.
or Men in Black or things that had a fun spirit but weren't entirely comedies, but they had
Sure.
comedy and they had some horror. Um, the Frighteners, things like
Oh,
that.
yep.
Yeah.
There's just a bunch of things I want to write.
Yeah.
And they really don't make those a whole lot at the studio level. They just don't.
Yeah.
But they do make like Night at the Museum or something like that, which
Sure.
kind of has that vibe. It's
Yeah.
not too far off from
That's a
what
good
horror
point.
comedy
You're
is.
absolutely right.
And around the time when I was starting to do kids movies, those kind of movies started to get popular. They were movies that kind of had kids, but they also had like a supernatural spin, Jumanji, for example, or something like that.
Yep.
So I found that was a place where I could apply the kind of movies I like to write, and they would pay attention. And it just so happened when I was doing that, my stuff fell in the right hands, and I ended up in the Nickelodeon world. And from there, there was a short period of time where every time they were making a made-for-TV movie and they had like a sci-fi or a fantasy or a horror spin, they would usually bring me in some capacity, like I do a rewrite or something.
That's cool.
So I just kind of latched onto that, but it was really through the horror comedy kind of thing, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you saw more of that in the 80s or a little bit in the 90s than you do now.
Yeah, it definitely was an 80s thing, a little bit in the 90s.
90s.
It had a little run in the 2000s. Now it's coming back, I think, because of streamers.
I think so too.
Because of streamers, you see some kind of movies like Christmas. We had like I've done a lot of Christmas movies too, but like there was the Candy Cane Lane with Eddie Murphy, and they I don't know. There's those kind of movies are having a run on streamers. Like they make a bunch. Like what was the Kurt Russell Santa Claus Chronicles of
Christmas Chronicles.
Yeah,
things so good.
Things like that show up on streamers. They do make them for streamers now, and for a while there was probably a 10-year span that no studio would really touch it. Things like that. So anyway, Hubie Halloween, or I don't know.
Right.
Adam Sandler can do whatever he wants, though.
That's true. Yeah,
that movie reminded me a lot of oh my god, Ernest. Those Ernest movies.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I actually didn't realize that you were in like I was looking earlier today at like the books, like the children's books, the like young adult, like 7 to 14 range. And it's like stuff that like I have a 5-year-old, but he's super into what I guess like 5-year-old level of horror would be. So there's some stuff he hasn't seen, but he's really into anything that's like monster driven or has
Oh, cool,
creatures
cool.
or animals. And so the first one, I like added it to my list today for him because was Monster Stomper.
Oh
That
yeah.
looks so cute. And I
Hmm.
think like he's finally at an age where like he's cool if it doesn't have pictures. He can still
Yeah.
kind of follow
Yep.
the story and stuff. And but it's like it's neat that I always like when there are creators that put the horror stuff in things that are more like age appropriate. Because the stuff that I was into outside of obviously like Goosebumps and stuff when I was growing up was not super age appropriate, but it was what
Me
started
too.
my love,
Me too.
for the genre. Like my first memory of life was seeing Poltergeist when I was like 4,
Yeah.
and I want to be able to share that in a different space. And
Hmm.
so anyway, I thought that
Yeah.
was really cool because now I can share that.
Yeah, it's a different world than when I saw Halloween when I was 6 or whatever, 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we didn't have a lot of the cool the cool genre stuff back then. It really
Yeah, it's
was
different.
kind of they didn't even have when I was a kid, they didn't even have Goosebumps or anything like that. That just
Right.
didn't
Wow.
exist. The Hardy Boys was as close as we
That's
got. And
close.
that's kind of boring. I don't know. I read them all when I was a kid, but I was more into Stephen King or Clive Barker. But yeah,
Yeah.
so Monster Stompers is a good example. It's very Ghostbusters in
Yeah,
its
I figured.
tone.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that's how I usually pitch it. It's like a kid's
Cute.
Ghostbusters meets Godzilla kind of thing.
Oh, I'm so excited. Love
It's
those.
fun. It's kind of funny, and it's it's got a lot of giant monster stuff. So it's a fun one.
Yeah, that's perfect. You
Yeah,
had me at Godzilla too, because he's a big Godzilla fan.
yeah.
So that'll be cute.
I was a huge Godzilla fan as a kid. So.
Yeah. So when you started writing, because I know you said like horror comedy was kind of like your like start or whatever. Like was that the first thing, like the first kind of things that you ever wrote? Like where did your writing actually start?
Yeah, yeah. So I was actually a software engineer. This not to go too far back, but I
Yeah.
always wanted to write, and I always wanted to be a filmmaker. To the point when I studied computer science in college, I took all the film classes and stuff. I just wasn't a major. I just took all the classes. Um, and when I first got started, I started writing comedy, just pure comedy.
Okay.
It was the early 2000s, and things like Something About Mary
Yeah.
and I was a big Kevin Smith fan at the time. Like Clerks kind of blew me
Sure.
away. So when I saw
Yeah.
Clerks, I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I can do that. I'm going to write."
Yeah.
And my first script was actually the first script I finished
Mhm.
uh, was I was actually a juggler back in the day. Like I was a street performer. I used to juggle and do
You've
stuff.
literally done everything.
Yeah, people used to like I would say this stuff and it was a little I'd start feeling a little like Buckaroo Banzai or something. Um, so I used to juggle and I would go to the Renaissance Festival and I'd be
Yeah.
a juggler and stuff like that. The first
Yeah.
script I wrote was about a juggler at a Renaissance Festival and it was like in the early 2000s and it was like Clerks at a Renaissance Festival essentially was what it was.
Oh, no.
Love that.
And it won, like, it didn't win, but it came in like, it was a finalist at the Austin Film Festival. It was the first script I wrote. So I
Oh.
went to the Austin Film Festival. I met all these people. I saw like the producer. I remember the guy who wrote Men in Black. Um, I'm sorry, Galaxy Quest.
Oh.
Sat down with me at the bar and just started chatting me up and stuff. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And it,
Nice.
it just, I think that fueled me in a big way, the Austin Film Fest when I went there, like out of the
Yeah.
gate and won that. And then it took like 12 scripts before I ever sold anything. The first one out of
Yeah.
the gate, you're like, yes, I'm a finalist. I'm on the
Yep.
path. I'm going to be a big star.
Right.
And that's like 12 scripts later and nothing
Oh,
sold.
yeah.
And then you start doing stuff. But anyway, a lot of them were comedies. A lot of them were to shoot myself. I
Yeah.
wanted to shoot them myself. And then somewhere around script 12, I started to say, instead of doing comedies, well, I loved comedies. I was going to do my things that emulated my favorite movies, which were horror films, action
Yeah.
films, stuff like that. And I started to change. And instead of being like, I figured out I wasn't like the funniest writer, but sometimes I was the funniest horror writer, is what I discovered. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I discovered.
Counts for
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, I was a very funny horror writer, but I wasn't necessarily a funny comedy writer, is what I discovered.
They're very different. Yeah, they're very different.
They are.
Yeah.
And I have a very dark sense of humor, like very dark sense of humor. Like it really has to cross a line to make me laugh. It's true. So I'm, I'm not a psychopath or anything. I'm a very nice person, but I do have a very dark sense of humor. So
Yeah.
so horror comedy is really where I need to go to get laughs. I kind of like I actually think scaring people is funny to me. Like when
Yeah.
I write a very serious, scary movie and I put
Mhm.
scares in it, to me that's a laugh. I'm cracking up that I'm going to scare
I
you,
love that.
and you're gonna sit there.
Why do we
kind of
have to defend?
mean-spirited.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm kind of mean spirited in that way, but it's my enjoyment.
I was like, why do we, as horror creators and fans, always have to sort of justify or defend our sanity?
Yeah. It's I I was writing. I've been like dabbling in a how to write horror book. I've been kind of messing around with, and I wrote kind of my intro to it. And in the intro, I described like my origin as a horror kind of writer. I
Yeah.
used to spend time. Now this might be a problem. Like I probably should talk to somebody about this. But I used to sit there and hide behind trees and wait for my friends to walk by in the middle of the night because my neighborhood was the only neighborhood without a fence. And I would
Yeah.
literally sit there for half an hour, 45 minutes, knowing they were coming,
Oh my God.
just so I could jump out at them or something like that. So yeah, I don't like people to do that to me. So I've
Double
heard
standard.
I've heard comedians say they get into comedy to control the laugh, and I do wonder if like I was a scared kid if I got into like horror and stuff because I wanted to control the scare. I wanted to be the one in control of it as opposed to the one that somebody was jumping out at me. So I don't know. Deep down, there's probably something to that.
There's layer and complexity there, right? Sort of a way of facing our fears in some sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I think they say that like that's why people are into horror anyway. It's a very controlled sense of fear and anxiety because you're in your bed with your favorite blanket or whatever. You're like, and you're in this comfortable space that you trust and know is safe.
Yeah.
And you're, so then you're seeing these things that are not, but it's you get to control that level.
I think there is truth to that. It's like, what's the thing phobics have? What's it called? Immersion therapy or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, it's like exposure therapy.
Exposure therapy. That's the word I'm thinking of. Because I was a really scared kid. I had a lot of anxieties. But I was attracted to the horror stuff, even though that was part of the anxieties. I remember as a little kid going to Disney World for the first time, and I don't know if I was in kindergarten or something like that. And all I wanted to do was go in the Haunted Mansion. I just begged and begged to go in the Haunted Mansion. And as soon as, if I assume, have you been in the Haunted Mansion?
Yeah.
When they shut the doors at the beginning in that elevator room.
Oh yeah.
It's like one of my earliest memories in some ways. I was kindergarten, so it wasn't my earliest, but it was pretty early.
Yeah.
But I screamed and I was like, ah, and I grabbed my dad's hand. I was terrified, but for some reason I pushed myself to be in this situation. I wanted it, but I was scared. And I don't think I made it. I can't remember. I think they had to escort me out of the line. And then a couple years later, I remember my local church was having one of those Halloween haunted houses. It was a haunt.
Yeah.
And I begged and begged and begged to go, and I wanted to go. And I got there, and like they turned the lights out. I remember a strobe light came on, and some guys in hoods came out, and I was like, now I had to get out of there. But I begged to go in these things, but then I immediately was too scared to go in them. So it was just like this slow progression of, to the point where, a few years later, I was the kid who couldn't be scared. It was like, come on, bring something on. What I needed was just so, I don't even know what would scare me as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old, because I wasn't, as far as entertainment goes. But anyway, that's my I definitely think there's something about that controlling the scare.
It's thrill seeking. I mean, same reason why we get on roller coasters.
No, I'm too scared to get on roller coasters.
I don't do roller coasters either. I have a fear of falling. I cannot. Like, it has to be one that just like stays really low to the ground. If it goes up at all,
I'm going to Universal next week with my nephew's like a roller coaster fanatic, and he's already like, you can get in the Hagrid's roller coaster. It's a family roller coaster. You won't be scared of that. And I'm like, I'll have anxiety the whole day waiting to get on.
Oh, it's such a good ride, though. It's
Yeah, I'll probably get on it, but yeah, I was just in my mind. I'm like, you don't know. That'll be like the most intense part of the whole trip.
there's no flips or anything, you know.
Yeah, I've watched the video. I checked it out. I was like, I can get on this. I've done
That's part of exposure therapy is you have to do your research first.
That's
to
right.
And
prepare.
then you dive into it.
That's right.
Yeah, to prepare.
But
Sometimes that happens. So in my day job, I'm actually a therapist myself.
Okay.
So this stuff always happens to come up in our interviews, and I
Cool.
swear I'm not making it happen.
Yeah, no.
No, I think there's just a lot to dissect when it comes to this kind of these things. So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm. When I come on this type of interview, you usually ask like, "How'd you get into horror? What's your early stories?" So then these kind of stories come up, and it's definitely an exploration of psychology in some ways. Why, why I write horror, why all these things. I find these things kind of fascinating myself. I'm constant. I had no real answers. I always say I didn't really have an origin story towards it. My parents weren't killed at a Stephen King convention or something.
Sure.
Battling to get revenge.
Right.
But I'm constantly. It's kind of fun to go back and look and say, what were those early seeds? What were the things?
Oh yeah. Now I know. Angel, I know you had some found footage questions.
Oh, just one main one. I'll save all the ones I'm thinking in the back of my head. I told Steve, I was like, you don't understand how much I love Exist. Like, it's gonna be so hard for me to remember. Like, I'm
wearing a Bigfoot shirt right now. So.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I really, it's more just about like working in the horror genre, because I from what I've heard in other interviews with other creators and other filmmakers and stuff, is that working in the found footage subgenre is a vastly different experience than working in like a more conventional narrative, like what we're going to see in Last Night in Terrace Lanes. So I guess the question is really just, do you have a preference? Like, what are your thoughts on the differences between working on something that's found footage and something that's not?
So I love found footage. I wish, I think it's underrated. I know it kind of, because it was a glut of so many of them.
Yeah.
It kind of like became, at least at a studio level, they were like,
yes,
they refused to even see anything after a while. And I think that's a bummer, because I think it can be really fun when done right. And just because the low budget ones, and stuff like that might not work. I don't know. I think if somebody hit with a found footage tomorrow and it came out, I think it could be a huge hit. It just has to be the right movie, just like all movies, there could be good and bad found footage movies. It's interesting with Exists. So 3 movies. So I work with Eduardo Sanchez, the Blair Witch Project.
Sure.
Every movie he's made except Blair Witch, every movie he's directed, I've written in some capacity. So I've written the screenplay, some with him, some by myself, everything. So at first he did not want to do, he thought found footage, he and the gang kind of said, you can only do it once. It's never going to happen again.
Yeah.
And when I first met him, that was his impression of it. And as time went on, and then Paranormal Activity came out, and he was like, whoa, somebody else is doing my thing. I think, and he talked to Oren Peli and stuff, and they super nice and super big fan of Blair Witch and stuff. But I think he started to think, oh wait, I should be doing this. It almost just took him a while that he got to the point where he was like, I should be. Why shouldn't I do this? Why shouldn't I be doing this? So the interesting thing about, so there's a 3-movie stretch that's interesting. So he did the movie Altered. Altered was the first thing we did together, and it is not found footage. It is very cinematic, and in some ways it's probably of the ones we did his most cinematic in some way movie. It's the most conventional movie. Then he went and did a movie called Seventh Moon, which I also worked on. And Seventh Moon, he kind of was like, Altered was so cinematic, he kind of went back to a found footage look. It was almost like that Paul Greengrass kind of style. But it wasn't found footage, but it had a look. Then we did Lovely Molly, and Lovely Molly I originally wrote as a found footage movie.
Oh, okay.
But we converted it. in rewrites, we immediately said, let's, take it in another direction. So it had some found footage elements in it, but then
there's like some security camera shots, right?
Right.
Of like that down the hall when I think she's supposed to be at work, and there's some couple. That makes sense.
Security camera shots, and then she takes a camera out sometimes and does some footage and stuff like that as well. So that started as a found footage movie, but then kind of converted. It was basically, when I came up with that, I was like, let's do a possession. And this is before any of the other people had done possession movies.
This
I was like,
let's
do a possession movie as found footage. And we just slowly decided not to. Here's the weird thing. Exists was not originally written as a found footage movie, but we didn't get the budget we quite wanted to get for it. So probably 3 or 4 months before we shot it, I rewrote it as a found footage movie. And
that's great.
Really, it was just going through the script and figuring out like the justification for cameras and stuff like that. And by the time we got to Exist, Cloverfield had been out, some other things had been out.
Yeah.
And Ed was of the mind, and I was of the mind, we both were, that you could take liberties with found footage. You could have a score. You could kind of stretch it a little bit. It didn't have to be as Blair Witch, like this is real. Like, no, it's not real. It's kind of the stylized realism.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the funny thing about that movie. That movie was originally going to be not found footage at all. But as Ed was sitting and thinking about it, he was like, Bigfoot, of all things, Bigfoot should be found footage. That should be
perfect.
The
one.
Yeah. Pretty iconic.
Yeah. And Blair Witch, actually, its original inspirations go back to Bigfoot. Like, Ed's a big Bigfoot fan. He was a big Boggy Creek fan.
Yeah.
And a lot of the influences behind Blair Witch were Boggy Creek and just Bigfoot in general.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've seen the other one people always talk about when they talk about Bigfoot found footage is Willow Creek.
Yep.
Which was I was not as bemused with that as a lot of people were. Yep. But I saw Exist. Literally, I did 2 years ago. I did a found footage month in March. And every day I watched a found footage movie that I had never seen for 30 days. And a friend of mine had seen this and knew that I also was into Bigfoot and other cryptids and was like, I feel like you would really like this. And it was like an instant favorite. And it became easily my favorite, from the Bigfoot found footage subgenre that exists. Like, it was such an easy win because I just thought it was so smart because of exactly what you said, because Bigfoot is this elusive thing that keeps getting caught, on pictures or or all these different things. And I loved the way that story and how it escalates and turns into something totally different. The ending is wild, but I absolutely loved it. And so that's hilarious that it wasn't even going to be a film.
Yeah. Bigfoot's really interesting because Ed's written like 4 different Bigfoot scripts. But before we did Exist, we had another Exist script that it got all the way to the top of like Legendary Entertainment. They loved it. They wanted to make it. One of their heads of development always wanted to make a Bigfoot movie. They had another Bigfoot movie in production at the time. And I remember it was like, I can't remember, it was like Labor Day weekend or something. And on a Friday, and they basically said, have your lawyers ready. We're going to put a bid in. We just need to send it to Warner Brothers, to kind of their marketing department, see what they think. And basically the marketing department came back and said, no way are you going to do a big, this is unsellable. Bigfoot is unsellable at this studio level. So, on a Friday I went thinking I'm going to have one of the biggest deals of my life.
Yeah.
And then on Tuesday, it basically came back. We're not doing it. The marketing department just says they can't sell Bigfoot at this level. It was a much bigger movie than Exists. It was basically, we even said, like, if Exist had been a bigger hit, it could have been the sequel. It was more like Aliens to Alien,
I gotcha.
Bigfoots, I guess, with dollar sign. We tried that one. Ed has another one that he did that was like it was during Civil War times, which is really interesting. It's like this train crash and there's Bigfoot there. And
that's awesome.
It's a really good script, and he had that one before I even met him. But the thing about a Bigfoot script that's so hard is because you can't do it at the studio level. Nobody wants to do one at the studio level. I figured that Max Brooks' book might break that mold. He wrote that book, De-Evolution, I think it's called, or something.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so he wrote a book, and it was, I don't know if it was a bestseller, but it jumped to studio level. But the problem is studios don't want to do a Bigfoot movie, but on a low budget, you can't afford a good Bigfoot costume.
Yeah, it's like,
So it's a real catch-22. So
yeah.
we knew these guys at Spectral Motion. They had worked with us on Altered, and we had a connection with David Goyer. He had originally hooked us up with these guys because he worked with Del Toro, and they did all Del Toro's monsters. And Goyer worked with the Blair Witch guys on Freaky Links, and they became good friends back in the day.
Cool.
So he's always been circling around, like helping us out with various things. And but he hooked us up with them. And just to give you an example, like Exist cost like I don't know, 1.5 million or something like that. It's got a good budget, and about 600,000 of that goes to the creature. I mean,
to the creature.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's that much, and I'm not sure. The movie might have been like 1.2 or 1.1. I remember they wanted 1.5. That's the other the weird secret of some movies, like low budget, is you have like 1 million, but you keep trying to raise money while you're shooting it to see how much you can get. And I remember they were trying to raise money during that. I don't remember exactly what the number is, but let's say somewhere between 800,000 and 2 million that movie was. But I think The Creature was somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000. And it's more than just the creature. It's like the actor that's performing it. It's the whole team that comes with it. They're high-tech professionals that keep the suit intact, and they clean the suit, and they put the suit on, and they do the makeup, and they do all that stuff. And it's also the design and development of the suit and all that kind of stuff. But I may have that number completely wrong, but that's where my head is. It's somewhere huge like that. It's like a big number. You need at least that much to build the suit. So it's a huge commitment. It's like at least a quarter of your budget for a small movie to build a suit like that. To pull that off.
That's like the heart of the movie, right? It's sort of like,
it is.
I suppose that's sort of where you want
it. It breaks countless other movies when you get to see, like the big reveal, or you get to see pieces of whatever the creature is in other films, and it can ruin the experience because it's not believable, or it looks really hokey, or you can see, that it's a glove and you can see the skin, or, whatever it is. So it's worth it. I feel, and the payoff, I think, specifically in Exist is really high, because he was my favorite part of the film, and I thought he was brilliant, and I thought like the shots of him looked really great. I mean, so it paid off, but it really can make or break an experience when that's the focal point of your story.
I mean, the suit was so good, and that actor Brian Steele, he's like 6'7" and in great shape, and he does marathons and stuff. When he walked on set, it felt like Bigfoot was on set. Because he was thump, thump, thump. And it was a big thing in his suit, and it was to the point where we were thinking about doing some like pranks or something like that. But we were shooting it in Texas, and we were worried he might get shot. So we were like, we better not do it, because
good point.
Somebody might, just shoot
actually
him. They might think this is a monster out there, and we're going to take it down. But when he showed up on set, I remember we shot a scene. There's one scene that exists where fireworks go off, and he runs through the smoke. And I was there that day, and I was standing behind Ed, and I was kind of there. And there was a guy with like a steady cam or ring or something. And when he ran through that thing, because I wasn't really paying attention. I don't know, I was on my phone or something. I look up, and I was like, and it was like everybody it was like really scary, because here comes Bigfoot just charging at you, like right at you, and it was kind of terrifying to see.
That's awesome.
It was pretty cool. Yeah.
I know Angel's like loving this conversation right now, because Exists, like you said, is way up there.
It is. It's like, I think it's on my top 10 found footage.
When we made it too, we were like, there was no Bigfoot movies coming out. I mean, there was, what's the one with the guy in the wheelchair that was pretty popular?
That was about Bigfoot?
Yeah, it was kind of like Rear Window with Bigfoot. I can't think of it. It had some big stars in it. Anyway, that before Exist came out, like that one was out there, but it was kind of a weird take on Bigfoot. You know, Bigfoot was in it, but
Yeah.
and I remember when we were doing Exist, my big thing was, no pun intended, was I kind of wanted to do the purest Bigfoot. I was like, I want to do like some people started after they read my script, they were like, maybe there should be robbers and they're escaping to a cabin and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, I just want to do the pure kind of Bigfoot movie, just classic Bigfoot. Bigfoot's the star. We do all the Bigfoot gags. We come up with all the Bigfoot scares, and we just do. So when people, and this didn't quite happen because our movie wasn't quite popular enough, I think. But I wanted to make the movie that when people said, is there any good Bigfoot movie? That's the one. Oh, it's
that's
that
what
one.
I say.
Go with that. And a lot of people do, just because there aren't a ton of Bigfoot movies. There are some people that will say Willow Creek. But Willow Creek wasn't around. I remember when we found out about Willow Creek, because I don't think Bobcat knew about our movie or anything, but it had this weird feeling like we had shot ours and ours went through a regular production cycle, but Bobcat's was like, I'm shooting in October, I'll have it edited and done by January. You know, he rushed his, and it felt like, oh no, nobody was doing Bigfoot. Now this guy is coming in like 2 months after we made ours, and he's making a Bigfoot movie, and it's going to be out before ours. You know, so he did steal a lot of our thunder in some ways. Just by being first, he beat us to the market because his movie was made so quick. And I think his came out at like Sundance and stuff like that. So
it did.
It was one of those kind of things where ours took longer. We were trying to get a bigger sale. You know, it was doing that whole thing where I think we got studio notes and stuff like that and reconfigured it a little bit. But still, to this day, I mean, there are a lot of Exist fans out there. There are a lot of people
that like it comes up a lot more in the last couple of years. Like I see a lot more people posting about it, and you know, people like are always like if I post about it, like we covered it, we did a review on it for Found Footage Fridays for another series on the channel, and when we covered it and I posted, there were people like, I can't believe you've seen this. I always want to talk about it, and people aren't familiar enough, and then it's just like word of mouth, and people are just starting to. Plus, I think especially in the last like year, found footage in general has picked up in popularity. So now people are doing like, give me your top 20 recommendations. And people are probably finding stuff that way too, which is helping a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those movies that didn't have like a huge splash or anything. It was just like Lionsgate picked it up. It won like the audience award at South by Southwest when it played there. It was a midnight film at South by Southwest. But people found it over, you know, it played a lot on cable. It's been on Showtime a lot. I have unfortunately, I have a lot of movies like that. I'd like to one day not be the one that people find like years later.
I know I know what you mean.
Yeah. So
this will be the one.
Terrace
Plains will be that one.
This will be the one, I think.
I can only hope. But Altered was another one. Like, if either of you seen Altered?
No, it was actually one of the only ones that I had not seen.
So check it out. Of all the things, like when I come on horror podcasts and stuff, it's one of those kind of movies that people put on their like gems list that nobody knows, and they're like, "Have you ever heard of this movie, Altered?" Like, no, I don't even know what that is. And they'll watch it. They'll be like, "Wait, the Blair Witch guy did this?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "What is this?" And then they watch it, and then they recommend it. It definitely is one of those ones that was buried when it came out, and had a big budget, but it just at the time was like a movie that they were like, "Oh, we'll put this out," and they didn't even put a trailer for it on any of their movies or anything. It was Rogue Pictures back in the day. People are still finding it to this day, and it was like right in that transition when they still made like $5 to $10 million movies that were kind of independent, and they made a lot of money. It was like the last one of that era, like before they were like, "Oh, there's no DVD money anymore. We're done. Blockbusters are gone. We can't make these anymore." But it was like right on the cusp of that, and probably a little too late. It was the problem that they couldn't just like be like, "Oh, let's put this. We'll make our money back. No problem with it." But no, check it out. Check out Altered if you get a chance. I think you'll dig it.
We're going to include a list of a lot of your past work in the description below.
Steve, have you seen Exist?
I haven't. I'm feeling like
I
a
think it's
crappy
on
fan
Tubi.
here.
I think it's on Tubi or something.
Tubi
It is.
probably has it.
It's streaming.
Altered's harder to find now. I mean,
I think
you
when
can
I
get it on
looked up
YouTube or something.
Altered,
You got to
I
pay
think
for it.
yeah, I think you have to rent it, but I think it's on YouTube.
It's like a $2.99 or $3.99.
Yeah, I looked it up earlier because when I was just looking over stuff, that was like the only one because I was when I was looking at kind of like your your page of like the stuff that you've worked on. That's why I was like, Lovely Molly. I saw that like a long time ago. I didn't know but then I saw that one and I hadn't seen it. So, but yeah, you can rent that one.
Yeah, Altered the pitch is it's a reverse alien abduction movie. So it's a bunch of rednecks abduct an alien, and then all hell breaks loose. Like they capture an alien, basically.
Stuff. I'm here for it.
And it's like one of those UFO movies. It ends up on a lot of UFO lists. Like, what's the best UFO movies? And the people in the know.
Okay. I'm sold.
That.
Yeah, I'm sold.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it in a while. I should watch it again. But it's a cool one.
Yeah, that's on my list. And then Steve, we'll have to discuss after you watch Exist.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you already covered it for found footage, so we couldn't, but
yeah. But I wanted to, but there's like some story things. This is a very different, in my opinion, a very different take on Bigfoot than I've ever seen. And so I'll be really curious, like what your thoughts are as a viewer.
Yeah. I am surprised that there isn't as much Bigfoot content as you guys were talking. Like, didn't Netflix like just have something like it was like a Bigfoot or maybe like a Yeti movie or something to that effect?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Not that I know.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of them that are super low budget, and the costume looks like a gorilla or something.
Yeah,
it's kind of like werewolf movies run into the same problem, right?
It's
like if even something like I love Dog Soldiers. I think Dog Soldiers is great, but those werewolves are kind of funny looking. They're
like humanoid wolves.
Yeah. But it's hard to do a werewolf on a budget. I mean, I guess nowadays they use computers and stuff to do it, but again, on a budget, sometimes not so good.
Hard to make it look clean and sort of realistic. I never quite understand how budget goes into sort of because I'm not an animator or like like I'm always like curious how budget plays into like how it looks on the computer, because I figured a program's a program, right?
It's time. It's just time. I think
time you spend on it.
Like man hours. So it's like it's not just time. Like if it's one guy at a computer, then that's not as good as 50 people on a computer working on the same werewolf. You know what I mean? Like one's doing the eyes and one's doing, and they have the best tools and equipment. And they're getting paid and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if it's just one very talented hacker, they can only do so much in the amount of time, and have lives and stuff like that. So it's just tricky. It's a lot of it's man hours, but also a lot of it's artistry. Some people are just really talented at knowing what's realistic, and they're kind of like puppeteers and animators and stuff like that. So some of it's that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you're talking Angel's language. Bigfoot, werewolves.
I do love werewolves.
Yeah,
I haven't put up, you can't even see it because it's so far back, but I just got one of the coolest like werewolf prints I've ever had in my life. But I haven't gotten a frame for it, so it's not up on the wall yet. But yeah, all about the monsters.
I have back here a slaughtered lamb placard. It's up here somewhere. It's hard to see. Yeah, right over here. Yeah. No, I love werewolves. I've always wanted to do a werewolf movie. It's another really hard sell. It's like horror comedy. It's like I
don't understand it. And then I feel like when people do werewolves, they like have to add vampires or they have to add. It's like you do know that werewolves are cool like on their own. They don't need to be with anything else, least of all vampires. Like anyway,
Twilight.
Yeah.
I think that's like a whole nother gripe for me because I get so sick of werewolf movies only being made when they're done with other things. It's like, no, just werewolves.
I think it's the budgetary thing though, because I think once they get to the level they can do a good werewolf, then it's like we can't just make the werewolf or the wolfman. We need to make Underworld. Because if we're going to spend 50 million or 60 million back then, and now it's probably 200 million or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We need to make a world and have battles and stuff like that. And it can't just be one werewolf. So it's It's
Yeah.
definitely tricky. You know, it's just a budget thing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of those things I always thought the tools would really come down to the independent filmmaker a little bit more heavy. And who knows, maybe
Mm.
for better or worse with AI, they will.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, I would almost think an independent filmmaker could do a really good CGI werewolf by now, but they really, it's still pretty hard. It's still pretty hard. You know, it's even after all these years, it's still pretty hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And when they did the remake for Wolfman in 2010, what they ended up doing is like combining the two things. So there's practical effects, but they're mixed in with CGI effects. So like he wore a suit, like he's got fur on, right? But then some of his facial features and motions and movements of his mouth were edited, and there's CGI effects added to that for like things
Right,
like the
right.
change and just movement in general that are more wolfy, I guess, than human. But and it's and it worked. I actually really love that movie. That wasn't a knock, but that was the
Mhm.
compromise. Was it was like they couldn't get what they wanted going just one way, so they combined the two elements to get something else entirely.
I gotcha. But the last time I was really excited about a werewolf movie was Cursed, you know, and that was, I still
Craven.
think there's probably some like Craven's cut, you know, out there or something. There's an imaginary, because apparently they filmed like a whole movie for that before and then they redid the whole thing and stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's crazy. So
Yeah, I loved that when I went and saw that in theaters. I followed it on the film circuit, on the festival circuit for a while,
okay.
back when it was like eight for Silver before they changed the name to Cursed.
Oh,
And I actually really loved it. I know some people had some people weren't super into the design, but I actually thought it was really unique. I liked it. So
yeah.
that's a
Well,
good one.
it's a good one. And I mean, even Silver Bullet and stuff like that. I'm you know, it's fun
Those
stuff.
are great.
They're all
Silver
really
Bullet
good.
is definitely a horror comedy. I love that movie. I laughed so much when I watched that movie. So good.
I think the other tricky part about werewolf movies are
Mhm.
if you do the protagonist, if you do the whole thing with a person that becomes a werewolf, it
Mhm.
definitely is a strange, there are hard structures to crack as a writer because your hero is the villain at some point. You
Yeah.
know, it's going to switch. You're going to have that protagonist switch at some
Mhm.
point in the
Yep.
middle of the movie. And it's almost kind of
Yep.
predictable. So they're hard to
Yeah.
crack.
It's true.
When they get there, and that's probably another reason why the werewolves have to fight the vampires, because then they can still be a good
Then
guy
they
and there could be a
then
villain,
and they are usually right in
yeah,
those circumstances. They at least come from a good place. I mean, I guess you could argue there's some morality, like, yeah,
right,
but I think they came from a good place. They are the way they are because they were made that way by the vampires. So.
yeah. And it goes back to like some of my favorite horror that's very influential in my work is like body horror, like The Fly is a good
Oh, yeah.
example.
Oh yeah.
And that's one that really cracks like that kind of protagonist switch. You know, we're totally on
Cool.
board with Jeff Goldblum, but we still can switch somewhere in the
Yeah,
middle.
that's
So,
true. Yeah.
And werewolf movies are really like that, but they're hard ones. Like the great ones are great, and I mean it's that way with all movies. The great ones are great, and then the other ones are just the other ones. So
Yeah.
you know,
Have you ever seen Howling Village?
no,
It's either it's a foreign film. It's either maybe South Korean or I can't remember exactly which, but it came out in like it was a Dread Central movie that I found. Like they posted about it nonstop until it was finally released in the
oh,
States and I was finally able. But it is a very, very different take on a werewolf. And it's one of the ones that like when people talk about werewolf movies, I always ask, oh, have you seen? Because most people haven't. And it's really,
sure.
really, really well done.
What was the one? Was there one on a train or something that came out?
Howl.
That's it. That's the one.
I literally just watched that like 2 weeks ago.
I don't remember much about it. I watched it,
But
but I don't remember much about it. Yeah.
I wanted more wolves. I mean, the werewolves design and stuff was cool, but it was like they really weren't on camera enough for me personally. I wanted more.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people, you know.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Sorry, I'm done. I can go like when it comes to Steve knows because he's had to listen to me do these tangents before, but like, yeah, werewolf stuff, monster stuff, I'm like in it.
Yeah, it's all the good stuff. I love that stuff.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
but I know we're keeping you late. Was there just sort of anything else that you wanted to, either talk about Terrace Lanes or let people know sort of where to look out for when it finally drops?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for for having me for one. But
Of course.
it comes out Tuesday the 16th, January 16th. And it's right now, this is the way streamers have gotten, like, it's on Apple on the 16th for sure, but we don't exactly know when it's going to come out on all the other systems, but it's coming out on all the other systems. So if you have a particular flavor of systems, you know, you might need to give it a couple days before it pops up. I know,
okay. That's
I know,
good to know.
yeah, I know Dread had with the Jester, it was like that. They had one of the movies that was produced locally was the Jester that came out around October. And it was similar that it was supposed to, you know, everybody was like, is saying it's on Prime, it's on this, but like every day it was a new thing that it popped up on based on the algorithms. But I know it's on Apple right now. So if nothing else, go to Apple. If you want to hit it the first day, go check it out in Apple. But if for some reason you, I don't know, are anti-Apple or something, it'll be on all the other ones within a couple of days. So just look out for it.
Fantastic. And well, thank you so much for being with us. You know, we'll definitely keep an eye out for a DM from me after I see this film.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
This is great. Yeah, thank you so much. We had fun.
Yeah, no, you guys definitely kept me awake because usually I'm in bed by 9 o'clock. No,
if you were falling asleep talking to us, that would be bad for
it wouldn't be because of you. It's just because I'm old and I'm tired. That's all. But no, usually I stay up to it. I stay up to a hard 11:30 on most nights. So most Friday nights, 11:30 is where I usually go to bed. So I still have a couple hours left. But
but you want to settle in.
Gotta settle in, watch some TV. I'm gonna go. I don't know what I'll watch upstairs. Gotta go watch something. Have a snack. Go to bed.
There you go.
Just sort of the endless stream of or just kind of browsing before you sort of give up and then fall asleep.
Yeah. That's exactly what'll happen.
Cool. You want to wrap up, Steve? You want me to wrap up?
Go for it.
You gonna hit the button?
I got the outro for you.
Steve came on and joined Voices in September, and it has been amazing. Like, it's been so great having him. And so it's like I'm so used to doing everything on my own from before that I try to make sure I'm like I don't have to do it all by myself anymore.
That's the way to be. That's the way to
be. Jamie, thanks again so much for making time and coming on and chatting with us. Steve and I are both actually very, very excited about this film. The trailer got us hyped. It's very much up our alleys, and we're very excited about it. So, and thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. At least on Apple, this will be available tomorrow. So after you watch this, you'll have time to contemplate how excited you are, and then hopefully get a chance to watch it. Thanks again for hanging out with us. Have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend, and Steve and I will see you in the next one.
Bye.
Also, in case you missed it in the previous video, make sure that you go check out this awesome YouTube channel called Video Tasties. The slogan is protecting the past one VHS tape at a time. These guys do a lot of media stuff. 80s list, top list, physical media, collaborations, anything movie, film related, you can find there. There's some awesome tons of stuff for you to check out on their channel. I'll make sure to link them in the description for this episode.